Let's bring in right now Shaniqua McClendon, Vice President of Political Strategy at Crooked Media, and political commentator Ashley Pratt Oates. Welcome, ladies. Good to see you back here on this Sunday. So, Shaniqua, I want to talk about the surge of early voting that we've been seeing. In 2020, the early vote was heavily Democratic. Is the fact that some of these states are breaking records, is it good news for Harris, or do you expect a less dramatic split now that Republicans are encouraging early voting?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely it will be not as bad for Republicans as it has been in the past. But generally, I think that we don't know how people are going to split their tickets. I think there are a lot of Republicans who are over Donald Trump. And so just attributing kind of party registration to make assumptions about what these votes are, I don't think is a safe assumption to make. But I do think that what voters are hearing in kind of this final stretch from the candidates is driving a lot of this early voting. There's a small group of undecided voters who are still trying to figure out who they want to vote for. And if they are listening to the candidates right now, I think that decision is becoming a lot easier. Kamala Harris is out there talking about her plans, while, as you've covered in the past hour or so, Donald Trump is talking about other men's private parts.
Yeah. Ashley, Trump and the GOP, they were adamantly against both early and mail-in voting back in 2020. In fact, it became a partisan issue. At Elon Musk's rally for Trump this week, it was in Pennsylvania, he asked attendees to vote early, and a few people actually shouted back, "Why? Is the damage done? Will this hurt the GOP moving forward?"
Yeah, so I think back in May, there were reports that the GOP was starting to try to get people excited about early mail-in voting, and largely because they realized they're at such a disadvantage when it comes out to their get out the vote effort. And Republicans have always been notoriously pretty bad at get out the vote efforts, and Democrats have been great at it, and especially when it comes to incorporating early mail-in voting. So the fact that, they still have a candidate who is at the top of their ticket talking about how he won the 2020 election, which clearly he did not, is a problem, because that really makes people continue to distrust the early voting process. So I think the damage has already been done among Republicans. So while there may be, a few million who will vote across the country, I think early in some of the Republican columns, I think largely that's going to benefit the Democrats. But we've always seen Republicans turn out on election days. So I really do think this is going to come down to just a few select swing states and a small percentage of voters who, as Shaniqua mentioned, are undecided. So that's who they really need to focus on in these final sprints.
Harris, Shaniqua, spoke about reproductive rights at her Atlanta rally last night and brought up Amber Thurman, of course, the Georgia woman who tragically died after being delayed care. Here's a bit more of what she had to say. Here it is.
So look, we all know this is a healthcare crisis. This is not something theoretical. This is not just about a political conversation. It's very real. And Donald Trump is the architect.
Give me a sense over these final 2 weeks. How much should the issue of abortion be forefront for Harris? Do you think it is the most winning issue for her?
Absolutely. Ashley said this last week that abortion will continue to be an issue that's going to really drive voters. And we can pay attention to it or we cannot. But people are going to show up for it. I think the continued attention to it, even from Donald Trump saying he's the father of IVF and just shining a light on the more steps that Republicans could take when it comes to reproductive health. The thought of having a national abortion ban is on a lot of voters' minds. And it is one of the driving factors that I think is going to make a lot of Republican women decide to vote for Kamala Harris. So I do think it's a winning message for her to keep driving on.
And Ashley, former President Obama rallied in Las Vegas for Harris last night, calling out Trump's border policies and taking on one of the former president's biggest attack lines. Here's that.
He's very quick to say to Kamala, well, you were vice president 4 years. Dude, you were president for 4 years.
How big of an impact can he make bringing back the coalition that he turned out in 2008 and 12?
I think he can make a big impact, especially since she has brought in that coalition to now kind of make it a bigger tent as well, to really get some more enthusiasm under there that may have dwindled with Biden. So I think the more she continues to distance herself from Biden, really chart her own path, show that she is out there and really, really trying to get female voters, I think, very excited about this election and encouraged to go out there and vote for their freedoms. I really think it's a winning combination. If he can really rally those Black men that we were talking about in the last segment, I think something that's really important that was said by that voter who used to vote Democrat is that they don't want to talk to their wives about this. And she is talking to the wives. And I think that that's going to be a key driver on election day. So again, the abortion issue is something that will drive females and I think males who support them to the polls. But that is something I did pick up on from that segment.
And speaking of wives, Shaniqua, Michelle Obama is set to hit the campaign trail this week, including her first rally with Harris. How critical is she? And did they intentionally wait until the final stretch to showcase her and try to close the deal?
Yeah, I think the best time to bring someone like Michelle Obama out, who's really important, will bring people out. You know, if she's doing a rally, people are going to want to come see her, is after early voting has already started. And so that has happened. We want, Democrats want people to vote as soon as possible so they can run those numbers up. In the past, that's been something that's worked really handedly for them. But Michelle Obama is, you know, a star of the party. People have wanted her to run for president herself. And so it's going to be a really exciting time out on the campaign trail, and she's going to bring those excited voters out.
Here's something, Ashley. Harris has no plans to campaign with President Biden over the next 16 days. What do you make of that? And can she successfully step out from any administration shadow?
Yeah, I think she's really going to have to toe the line here. She can be supportive of Biden and the administration that she's been a part of, but she really needs to distance herself in a way that shows that she is a candidate for change. Because I think what we've seen in new NBC polling as well is that Trump is polling a little bit ahead when it comes to being that candidate for change. And that's largely probably because the incumbent in office right now, obviously, is a Democrat. So I think at this point, the more she, again, showcases herself as the candidate for change, the more she has that hopeful rhetoric, and she's going against somebody who is just continuously spewing conspiracy theories on the campaign trail. We are now seeing that swing voters actually are less likely to support a candidate who supports the election denialism theories that we've been seeing Trump continue to double down on. So polls consistently change, but that has been really interesting because I think her pro-democracy message in the final stretch may actually resonate with undecided and swing voters.
And can I ask you to weigh in on this too, Shaniqua? And I want to go back to what we heard from Barack Obama when he said, you know, he condemns Kamala Harris being vice president, but he says, dude, you were president for 4 years. So this whole concept of change, is Harris still commanding this idea?
Yeah, I think so. She started in her Fox interview. She had a lot clearer answer about how she would be different from Joe Biden. But I think that people just need to be reminded of who Donald Trump is. And he's been reminding people as he's been out on the campaign trail. You know, at Vote Save America, we put a video out this week, and it was just a montage of all of the things that happened in the first 2 years of his presidency. And, you know, he was in office for 4 years. You know, I think about something like immigration. He always points to the vice president as have not have done anything while she's been in office, but he was actually president for 4 years. And so, you know, the bill that has been put forth that he has told his Republican counterparts not to move forward on is something that he could have pushed for. So, you know, he's just going to continue to do this. And then, yeah, it's just what he does.
Yeah, gotcha. Shaniqua and Ashley, a couple more weekends. We'll see you. Thank you.